Unturned is presented by UpdateAI.
I think a lot of people are so stuck in just trying to keep up that they're doing what they've always done and they're just trying to add more resources to it. But I think there's a lot of financial pressure, especially in the tech industry, to keep those costs down. I think that's going to start to force some innovation to happen. If as long as you, as the person that's making the buying decision or the company that you're working with or whatever, has a higher perceived value than the literal dollars they're paying for your solution, everybody wins, right? Yeah. That's it.
You ask customer success managers almost all the time, could you identify a measurable goal for every single one of your customers? And usually the answer is no, right? Even the most tenured, experienced senior executive individual contributors. How did you get your team to operationalize the work they did around outcome?
Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Unturned. I'm Josh Schachter here with Kristi Faltorusso. And today we're talking to Michael Goetz. Michael is the Vice President of Customer Success Strategy at GitHub. He's had that role for just over 6 months now. And before that, he was the Vice President of Customer Outcomes. So I'm very excited because we get like the leader in outcomes and strategy, tactical and strategic. So perfect. Michael, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. All right, Josh, can I lead in quick?
Go.
Because I have a very specific. So, Michael, you have the most intentional titles of any customer success professional I have come across. So, can you please help me understand, how did we get there at GitHub? Because you went from Vice President of Customer Outcomes, again, very specific, to Vice President of Customer Success Strategy, which sometimes you see those things kind of wrapped under the generic title of Vice President of Customer Success, but I need to understand the intentionality behind these and the work that you're doing.
No, it's a great question. It's actually interesting. There's a slightly interesting story to this. So when I joined a little bit over 4.5 years ago at GitHub, I was hired as the VP of Customer Success. Then I reported to a VP of Customer Success and Support. And so as I was coming in, I was saying, it seems kind of strange that you would have two different levels of leadership with the same name. And realistically, if we wanted customer support to embody the entirety of what we do to help make customers successful, my boss should just be the VP of customer success. And then I need to come up with a new name, right? And many companies ago, I became really hyper-focused on the idea of driving the outcomes that customers want versus, really focusing on like, am I driving renewals? Am I driving adoption? And I used to have this big mantra about what is the business outcome the customer is looking for? And if we can deliver on that, we'll be successful. So I'd used customer outcomes before. I ended up being the VP of customer outcomes, focusing on really trying to make sure that we are spending all of our energy on getting to the outcomes customers, the desired outcomes customers are looking for. Now, fast forward to about 6 months ago, well, it's probably a little bit over a year ago now. GitHub has scaled tremendously, even since I've been here. And we got into that same problem where the delivery organizations were both trying to deliver and drive strategy to scale and drive strategy and drive repeatability and, develop offerings and all those pieces. And it just became too much and very fragmented. And so working with my boss, we decided to consolidate across all the different parts of customer success, the things that would be more strategic or cross-functional nature. So you think about like support and services offerings, anything about adoption frameworks and offerings and repeatability, some specialists, sort of like cross-functional technical specialist teams, and pull those all together. And that's where we came up with the Customer Success Strategy organization name. So that's kind of that's the navigated road how we got there.
Josh, can I double down?
Go. I mean, I love it. You get to skip the tactical and just go straight to the fun strategic thinking.
Well,
kudos to you.
I just have I have so many questions, Michael. Me, selfishly, they're all selfish too. Yeah. Okay. So I actually did a post this morning. Yeah. Okay, Josh, relax. So I did a post this morning talking about the fact that most customer success managers basically don't really understand the business side of their customers enough to articulate a measurable goal that is tied to their support services, software, whatever. And that's not uncommon, right? You ask customer success managers almost all the time, could you identify a measurable goal for every single one of your customers? And usually the answer is no, right? Even the most tenured, experienced senior executive individual contributors. How did you get your team to operationalize the work they did around outcomes? And how did you incentivize the right behavior? How did you help your customers articulate their goals? Because I feel like that's also a blocker for folks. You show up to these meetings very well intentioned to have a conversation around goals and outcomes, and your customers are giving you bupkis. And so a lot of these folks don't know how to massage that into something meaningful and measurable. So can you walk me through how you built a business around that?
Yeah,
Kristi, I just want to say that this was a really good question.
Oh, thank you.
It was
selfish, but I appreciate you saying that.
It made me feel good about like we're clearly doing everything right and we've nailed this, and it's honestly it's a work in progress, right? I would say we are doing better than we were, and we still have a long way to go in terms of really getting to that understanding and anchoring our conversations around what the business outcomes and the challenges customers have. Some of this has to do with like we don't necessarily know sometimes when the customer comes out of the sales process, but we just didn't get a lot of context. And so we have to go and do a bunch of discovery. Other times we have a much more robust sort of set of information to deal with. And we kind of know the reason they came to GitHub was because of X, Y, and Z. But, I think it's a challenge for customer success managers because think about it, most of them are incented or measured. It's about renewal rates. It's about adoption rates. It's about CSAT, NPS, right? And all those have to do with like the business's perspective of how well the customer is doing. So you don't come from a place of like, well, just what are you trying to do, right? And so what I try to impart upon people is that yes, it's important to measure those as business metrics, but the best thing you can do when talking to a customer is just understand what they're trying to do and help them solve that problem in a very consultative manner. Sometimes, and ideally, you've aligned in the sales process to that your product helps solve those problems. So that's a natural flow. But it's okay also to say, well, we can help you with 2/3 of that problem, but I also know about these other maybe tools or something else that's going to actually get there. And I've found that customers are much more appreciative and much more willing to do the hard work that you need them to do, championing the software inside of their organization, really partnering with you to help drive adoption through the organization when they feel like you're focused on making their outcomes successful. So if you can do that, you'll get a lot of help internally that'll just help you scale as a CSM and drive more impact without having to go do it all yourself.
Okay, well, I got to go tactical for a second because even the best folks that can get good answers to these questions, the tracking of it is trash. How are you tracking these things with your customers so that at scale, as an organization, you can see like 80% of our customers have a good qualified goal identified and they are progressing towards it, right? Because it's not even just the identification. It's like how are we measuring against it in a scalable way to like know if the business is on track, if that's your entire reason for existing.
Yeah. We're going through another iteration to see if we can do this a different way. Cause I would say it's about marginally successful the way we're doing it now. We had historically we went the original route of let's just make one unified success plan, give me your objectives and I'll make project plans against them and kind of going down that path. And what we got was their objectives were roll out Copilot to 1,000 developers. And those aren't the objectives and the business outcomes you want to get to, right? And so then we tried to go take a different tact and break it apart and say, okay, we're going to have a discrete business outcome. It has to be what is the customer trying to do? And then you hang all of the work and activities off of that, as opposed to having like a singular plan for a customer, trying to mirroring a little bit more what we were seeing with our customers where they have like 5 different things that they're trying to do. And especially if you get into different business units, they're not aligned half the time, right? And so being able to track that in one plan was really challenging.
Well, what are the differences? I mean, isn't it always just build better, more better code?
Not always. Sometimes a lot of times it's about developer experience, right? So, I think it's about providing the tools the developers want to make them happy. There's a saying, right? Happy developers make better code, right? So the more that you can keep your developers having a good experience, they'll develop. There's actually research that's shown like they will develop higher quality software faster, right? And with less issues. If they are using the tool and they get into the flow, the developer flow, a lot of times is what they call it. so sometimes customers, they're just curious about like, I don't really care which Git platform I use. Everyone wants to use GitHub, so let's use GitHub, right? It's less about the features at that point. You see this a lot with Copilot and some of the other generative AI tools in the generative AI space. It's really about like developer choice. Can be something. Sometimes it is, to your point, Josh. Like, especially in top-down organizations, I need to increase developer efficiency by like 30% or 20%. It's a money issue. Sometimes that's the case, but it's not always just as simple and cut and dry as that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you guys use Gong for your call recordings. Are you using Gong to understand what the needs are of your customers, when they first come in the door or afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, we're experimenting with it right now. I think it's a very interesting age of all the different tools that can just sort of like capture information much easier than handwriting down the notes or typing up your notes. I would say, I think we are on the process of using it for customer conversations. I do know that we use it in parts of our sales organization already. They do use it, which is where we were seeing a lot of the tremendous value that they were getting out of it. And so we're experimenting right now in our sort of customer success area.
Cool. Because I want to tell you my idea, Kristi. So I hadn't told you this before, but the question that you asked, of course I'm promoting here, I'll always be selling, right? But the question you asked about tracking those needs, that's exactly what I want to build in Update. I've been wanting to build it for 2 years. Richard, my head of engineering, won't let me. He's so controlling with the roadmap. But I want to build like a canvas, call it whatever you want, that basically tracks for every customer through the entire revenue lifecycle, pre-sales all the way through renewals and expansion and whatnot. Am I capturing the needs of the account? And even at the per stakeholder level, even based on which stakeholders matter the most? And am I continually going and updating what those needs are? And am I capturing the outcomes qualitatively? Because you can use other metrics and stuff for the quantitative piece. But am I capturing the needs and the outcomes in their own voice? And is there a gap in the two? Or am I omitting and I don't have the information for either of the two? I don't know what it looks like. It's in my brain right now. It's just a fuzzy thing, like a Jackson Pollock, but that's what I want to build, is tracking the needs versus the outcomes over time. So I'll call you up, Michael, when we get there. Not tomorrow, but maybe, maybe next month.
Well, look, it's a challenge, right? Because it's such a nebulous thing and it changes, right? It's depending on the outcome. So I always tell my teams, as long as as the person that's making the buying decision or the company that you're working with or whatever, has a higher perceived value than the literal dollars they're paying for your solution, everybody wins, right? Yeah. That's it. And that perceived value could be anything, right? It could be, I got a promotion, so I'm bringing you along with me, right? It could be, direct. I was able to cut, I was able to reduce costs. I was able to, show these metrics moving up into the right. So I think your idea is not a bad idea. I think the challenge is just sort of like, there's so much variability on what the value is for all customers. It might be difficult, but call me up. I'm happy to talk.
Michael, all right. So I promise this will be my last like ton of tactical question on this, sure. And then we can move on to something far more interesting. So Michael, did you think about approaching this very differently across your customer base? I mean, you guys don't have 100 customers, right? You have quite a few customers. So when you think about approaching this, is it different by industry, by segment, by like, how are you guys approaching this? And like, where did talking about the structure across the customer base? Yeah. I mean,
GitHub has B2C and B2B, right? So we have free people, free users that use GitHub, all free, developers, billions of developers use GitHub every day, right? And all the way up to these large strategic customers, right? Through partnerships with Microsoft and others, right? And so the approaches have to be different, right? The way that we think about this. Like, so when you think about it, the very tail end of the scale, our community teams does a great job engaging through these discussion forums that we have. And the way they think about it is at the high level, it's like there are personas. There are admin personas. There are developer personas. There's security personas. And like, are we producing content that is, helpful for them, right? It takes on there's a lot of tight partnership with our marketing teams as well. Not that we're marketing in the forums, but it's the same sort of thinking, right? We think about personas and we think about the content that would be helpful to those. But then we also have teams that directly engage in those discussion forums to make sure that those individuals have at least a human touch point, right? Versus just all you're doing is pumping out a bunch of content at them. There's some sort of interaction level that's happening. You go scale all the way up to the enterprise, it's very different, right? We have very white glove, multiple people working, very discrete understanding of what it is they're trying to do, heavy partnership, regular touch points, right? The middle gets hard for us because we have customers that we would consider a small business, but there are unicorns that are going to grow up in the enterprises within 18 months, right? How do you actually treat them to where they're going to be versus where they are today? So it's definitely varied on how we approach it, but we try to reuse as much as possible as we go through the different segments. So, for example, we have these adoption frameworks for each of our product lines, and those adoption frameworks basically say, here are the things you should do from awareness all the way through sustainment of usage. And best practices, set up a champions program, do an enablement, and then we take it and we build it for the enterprise, the biggest, widest glove strategic implementation possible. And then we start stripping things out till we can get down to that scalable motion for a customer to drive. So that's sort of the strategy we've been using for as we approach all things. And that includes sort of like identifying what their drivers are and like what they're actually trying to do with GitHub.
What are your thoughts on like creating smaller milestones around this, right? Because an outcome could be this big, lofty business goal that takes 2 years to get to, right? But we know that's like a Herculean effort, and it's hard to keep people involved and engaged and motivated to continue to do the work when the goal is so far from them. So how do you work with your team to design smaller, attainable goals or milestones along the way, especially when their goals are so different across all of these different size customers and cohorts? How do you think about that approach?
Yeah. One benefit of being in a developer-centric company is, one of the core tenets of software development is how do you break things down into the smallest piece possible, right? And you start working on little piece. So I can refer back to that and say, you have a big lofty goal, you have to break it down one level down, another level down, another level down. There's a lot of, I try not to, make people roll their eyes at me with Gantt charts and, WBS codes and project management terminology. But I mean, it works, right? Like the idea, the methodology around a work breakdown structure actually works as long as you don't call it that, right? You say, look, you have to break our big problems down into little tiny problems and then get down to the very smallest piece that you can, because you want to be able to complete it without too much like interdependency or anything that might block you along the way. You also want the adrenaline rush of like, hey, we made progress, right? So things are too big, to your point, Kristi, like they're too big. It feels like they take too long and you lose energy and momentum.
Yeah.
And, customers are busy. You are not the only thing that they're worried about. Even if you're the core like development platform that they use, they have 1,000 other things that they're trying to do. And so what I've seen is the smallest you can make, you can break these things down while keeping them sort of connected to the overarching goal and the outcome they're aiming for. Helps keep momentum. But you got to come back and circle back and say, look at all these wins, right? Look at all the progress we've made in the last quarter, month, whatever your regular check-in is with the customer.
Customers are busy, but they may be in your product more than any other for your customers, right? I mean, how often is a developer, and that might not be a buyer, right? But they're like 50 times a day, right? I mean,
developers are in constantly, right? And well, it depends, right? So some developers use GitHub.com themselves, so they're on the web browser and they're actually making changes. A lot of them will be in a terminal, right? It's just Git after all. And so Git is ubiquitous. We don't own Git as a source control system, but and so they may not have any other actions other than they know when they push their code up to their repository, it says GitHub on it, right? Like that might be the only thing that they really interact with on a daily basis. And so there's a lot of work that our product engineering team does to create sort of like command line interfaces that make the development experience better when using Git. And so we kind of address them in that, but it's kind of a hard measure, right? The thing that we really struggle with, or not struggle, but we don't really have a lot of driver for is those champions and those sponsors, right? To really get in regularly, because usually those are VPs, CIOs, CTOs, right? And speaking as a VP of CS strategy, it's been a very long time since I've actually had to push code on a regular basis. Same thing with them, right? And so we've historically had an approach of, we'll create a bunch of APIs, and then it's up to you to build the visualizations of how you're using GitHub. That's slowly shifting. We're providing a little bit more of a prescriptive perspective, and we're hoping that gets those champions a little bit more plugged into, hey, this is the value. You're in GitHub. You're actually in it with your developers as well.
Hey everybody, it's Josh. Ever wonder what your team's missing in customer calls? UpdateAI doesn't just take notes. It captures the moments that matter. It auto-builds account plans, spots risk and upsell signals, and services the themes your execs actually ask for. It's what top revenue teams are using to stay ahead. Message me at josh@update.ai. I'll show you how it works.
You have all these raving fans, or enemies, right? But you guys are a very well-esteemed product. So you've got all these raving fans at the end user level for important people that are using the product as well. But yet there is that dynamic that they're not necessarily the ones that have the wallet. So I guess my question is, how does that help or hurt you in some ways?
Well, it helps in the fact that if the products are made available to developers, generally speaking, driving individual, like, I need this developer to use GitHub is not high, right? So it's not
Adoption
as I'm trying to create a change or transformation in an organization with it. And so that's super great. It makes adoption at the individual user. The challenge comes into sort of like defending the value around the product as you kind of work through the organization. And so, one of the things I talk to our product managers a lot about is, it's great that you have a developer persona, you have an admin persona, you've got what are these personas, but like, what's the persona of the organization itself? Like, how are you showing value to the grouping of people, right? And do you have specific moments of truth for them in the product, right? So, like, take for example, every large enterprise IT organization that I've ever seen has a finance team that they answer to, and that finance team really doesn't like this big giant bill that they don't know how to attribute to all these different business units, right? And so that's why you have cost center billing and all these pieces, right? And so we were this customer success org was a big advocate early on, and we needed to be able to provide that same sort of output to the champions that we had, because we knew that was important to them and value to them. It took a while, but we started to see improvements to the billing APIs, and now you can kind of break out cost centers as well inside of there. And so that's the thing that I think is the most challenging. Is GitHub is great. Like, if I could go to 1 billion developers, because they would love it, they like the experience, it's great, it's wonderful for them, as long as we don't have any uptime issues and it's there, right? That's not the issue. The issue now is, when you're trying to get companies to pay millions of dollars for the added features and the value that we know that they're getting out of it by kind of centralizing on a standard platform, we got to make sure that we're being able to prove that in a way that's interpreted by the champions, the stakeholders, those other people that aren't actually using the product on a daily basis.
What's the biggest rock you're pushing up the hill right now? Where is your biggest focus?
Volume. So what I mean by volume is the pace of change, especially in generative AI right now, is insanely high. And I was early on in the DevOps movement, and so that seemed really fast to me at a startup that I was working on. That's nothing compared to what we're doing now. I mean, I think we're getting new features or new capabilities, or features that were new 6 months ago are now like nobody wants to use them anymore, right? It's like JavaScript frameworks on steroids or something, right? Where it's just like things are just moving so fast in this space. And so what I mean by volume is it's really hard for not just our customers, but for our field teams to keep up, right? Like, I was just talking to somebody earlier today on another call where, so we have to think about this differently, because I have a CSM who is saying, hey, I'm asking a question about a feature that, I was shipped 3 months ago. That CSM, high performing CSM, they go to all the enablement sessions, they read all of the different newsletters and everything that comes out, everything we do to enable, and they still miss that this feature that the customer asked for shipped 3 months ago, right? And so, you can go about it and say like, well, let's do more enablement, let's do more training. And I think the pace and the volume that's coming out, really trying to figure out how do we, get more just-in-time enablement and just really be more assistive, be more of an assistant to the field teams than expecting them to hold all of this context in their brain and be able to provide the right recommendations and guidance for customers. I think that's going to be the biggest boulder to kind of address over the next 12 to 18 months for us. Is the pace isn't going to slow down. So how do we make it to where our teams are able to keep up with and meet the customers with a response to the needs that they have with the most latest and greatest updated information that we've got.
Any leads on how you're going about that?
No, well, I don't know. I heard something about large language models are really good about taking a bunch of information and distilling it down into, a very targeted thing. We just got to worry about those tricky hallucinations, right? So I think that's the thought. We tried to do workflows, right? So it was sort of like, if customer has these criteria, then go here, kind of like a choose your own adventures. But it got too complicated too fast for us. So if I know this answer to that, I'll definitely let you know. But we got some experiments rolling around.
Michael, how are you and the team, the broader organization? So whether it be product or marketing or sales, like how is the rest of the organization rallying around that same problem, right? Because I think it's one thing to think about it through the lens of like, how are we enabling our teams to help enable our customers? Why not go straight to the source with other parts of the organization? So are you working collaboratively with other folks to help address that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the people I was talking to earlier was in the product organization, right? They're struggling with it too, right? The pressure that they have to compete in the market today is increasing more and more, right? They have to quickly adapt, quickly change. And when large organizations, you think about, GitHub's just a part of Microsoft, but we have thousands of employees, right? And it gets really hard, right? It's like a big whip, right? When the leadership or the product leadership decides to make a shift, even if it's like a tangential shift, by the time it gets to the bottom of the organization, people are thrashing all over the place, context switching and everything that's happening. And so, I would say, I'm constantly talking with others. There's a lot of empathy. Like everybody's like, yeah, I get the same problem. And so, talking to other peers in the industry, and just like, hey, how are you thinking about this? What are you doing to try to solve this? I think a lot of people are so stuck in just trying to keep up that they're doing what they've always done, and they're just trying to add more resources to it. But I think there's a lot of financial pressure, especially in the tech industry, to keep those costs down. I think that's going to start to force some innovation to happen in this space, because I don't see how you can keep up with the pace and keep doing it the old sort of manual way and move forward.
We skipped over this in the beginning. Tell us a little bit about the way that your org is set up, the number of folks, the types of roles, that sort of thing.
Sorry,
so
Josh,
my team's
I skipped
actually
right
pretty
to
small.
everything. Sorry.
We just cut to it. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Like I said, I had so many questions, Michael. I'm sorry to derail our conversation.
No, my organization is small, and I would argue that any organization that's like mine should be small, right? So we've got about 20-ish people now, 21 people. I will say it's kind of nice only having to sort of manage 20 people after managing like 140. But they're all senior level folks. And so we've got a couple of folks that focus in on our support and service offerings. So these are the people that go evaluate the market. They listen to customer feedback, and they determine, maybe our premium support offering needs to have some sort of like incident command and control off component or something. Then they go work with the support organization and they say, is this feasible? Can you support this? Like, what's the ROI on this for us, right? And so they kind of manage it. Same with services. Services is, what are the type of challenges we're seeing? What kind of packaged offerings can we have? What's the margin going to be on those? And kind of doing operating development. I have another team called what we call them customer success practice leads. And it's a new role. We're still sort of figuring out exactly how it aligns, because the strategy team, as my boss likes to say, doesn't have any arms and legs, right? The arms and legs are the CSMs, the services engineers, the support engineers. engineers, right? We call them supported cats in GitHub. And they're the ones that actually do stuff. And so it's a lot of alignment and understanding those business units. So the CS practice leads are connected into product and our go-to-market functions. And they're sitting here saying, okay, this is what's coming down from product. This is how we're going to go to market with that product. And this has these sort of implications across customer success. So maybe
are these like different practice leads for each type of segment, or how you split?
Yeah. So for each product line. So we actually segment by product. So we have one for Copilot, we have one for GitHub Advanced Security, we have one for GitHub Enterprise and Platform. And they sort of align that way. And then they work with the different teams to kind of build out any offerings or capabilities that we think we might need to have or update as new product changes come down the pipe. And then I've got a group of technical folks. There are currently 2 teams. One is called Fast Track. It's essentially an invested resource on our behalf, highly technical, very experienced folks that are brought in for 1 to 2 weeks to basically get somebody unblocked or move a specific team forward very quickly, right? So it's very targeted issue. How do we get them go forward, right? And then we have one last team that's called ODST. The acronym I can't even remember off the top of my head, but we just call them ODST for so long. But those are, I've had them in these types of teams and other companies. These are like the people that just parachute in. They have all of the knowledge, everything. They can literally commit into the core code base if you need them to. And they solve really, really, really difficult problems that are, need that magical unicorn dust of understanding customers and the understanding how the product functions itself. And they don't ever do any sort of like patch or like custom coding specifically for one customer. They try to help them with a workaround, and then they try to contribute back into the product. Like, this is going to help other customers that encounter this issue. So that's my team as a whole.
And there's like 150 folks that are on the tactical side, CSM?
Yeah, so in the customer outcomes team now, there's about 120 people there, and there's about, I think there's a similar number of folks in our support and our services organization as well.
And then you've got your 20 that support them. So you're kind of like the cool kids. You're the ones that were,
I don't know,
or like the advanced, like the, like what do they used to call it? Like in the bright classes, you take the top kids, whatever.
Oh, the gifted and talented.
Yeah, thank you.
They were the gifted and talented. Yeah.
No, you guys are the gifted program.
It's actually not like that. I would argue that we have a lot
remedial.
of people that are we are. What's a better way to frame it up? We're like the teacher's assistants, right? So if we're going to keep with the school reference, right? So we have people who are plugged into what needs to be done, and they're there to try to make life easier for the delivery teams themselves, right? And so help them out. So we have an enablement team, so they'll partner with an enablement team and make sure that they're enabling on the right content and fine tuning things. It's really about taking out the things that slow down delivery and time with the customer out of the delivery orgs and putting it into one place. So all of that sort of routine that's you need a SME to build a new webinar. You need a SME to, help with some copy on an email campaign that's going to go out. You need all of these things to just keep the business rolling. Versus instead of taking that out of the delivery teams, we're trying to centralize that into one place as much as possible to keep them focused on the customer.
And do you have a CS ops function as well, or is
we do? Yeah, we do have a CS operations team. They are inside of our revenue operations team, and they partner with us pretty closely. I talk to them very regularly. They kind of keep the business running internally versus as much of sort of like how the business operates. So think of things like budget, resourcing, those types of items. They are slowly starting to expand and picking up more of like what I would say a traditional CS operations team would be, a little bit of what we're doing in CS strategy. So we've been doing some trading and saying, well, why don't you take the health management program, right? Why don't you take the risk management program? I don't need to do that. It seems like a very ops heavy activity. It's been defined, doesn't need to be iterated on. You should just sort of run it. So we're doing some trading back and forth with them.
Michael, what's the most interesting thing or most creative way that your team is using AI today?
Oh, geez.
I mean, I want the scrappiest, like I don't want oh, it's embedded in our platform. No, I want scrappy, creative use case that went under the radar, that one person was oh, I could do this thing.
So I'll give you the one that I just was listening. I was getting a listen on from our ODST team. One of the things that they do when they dive in is that they identify some gap and that needs to be developed. And they want to ship it back into the product. We don't have product managers in our team, right? And so there's no product manager sort of managing the development of this thing. So you just get some engineers that are seeing a problem, they're going to develop a problem, they're going to ship it out the door, right? And I think every software engineer is probably listening to this right now is that seems like a dream. No product managers messing around telling me to do any of this other stuff, right? And so what was interesting is they were they see the value of product management helping to refine and structure the work and making sure that this thing is solidly built, it meets all the use cases. We've kind of gone through, and they've actually been experimenting with AI in trying to create sort of a product management agent, right? So basically say here's the problem I'm trying to solve. It needs to be within this context. Can you kind of help me break this down into sort of user stories or an epic and structure those things out. It's not working yet, but he did get pretty close to it. It's a pretty interesting experiment that he's working on. But I see a lot of our team, if they're not using Copilot itself, looking at ways to create agents or assistants for them, so that to make up for lack of resources, right? So
right.
I don't have a content developer for email templates, right? And so I'll see some of our practice leads, they'll go and say, hey, here's a bunch of unstructured content that I have, and I need to make an email campaign targeted at SMB customers that is intended to drive adoption of Block. Can you give me some copy? And that gets them 80% of the way there. And then they'll go through and sort of edit that copy. But the most interesting one was the product management one. I thought that was pretty interesting. So,
PMs look out.
Yeah. Michael,
this is great. Very exciting stuff. I love the breakdown. We haven't seen it before on the program. So really unique.
It's definitely been interesting. Like I said, been trying to talk to a lot of industry peers. There's not a lot of folks that are focusing just on customer success strategy as a team. There are some, and they're out there. You find them doing offerings development is the thing that I've seen is if somebody's focusing on that, they usually have some sort of strategy team surrounding them. But there's not a lot. And I do think that there's a certain size, right, where this becomes a reasonable investment. If we didn't need this, a year and a half ago, right? We could just do it. We should collaborate together and it works. But a certain scale that you're operating at, it is important to sort of break that out. But the biggest tip I'll give people that are considering creating a CS strategy organization is you definitely want to make sure that you actively fight against that ivory tower situation, to where you're over here making a strategy and you have no connection to what the delivery team's doing, and you're just telling them what to do and you're dictating things. So that's not going to work. I've never seen it work. And so that's part of why we have a bunch of technical specialists within the organization that still engage with customers regularly, because we want to have that touch point. It's also why we ourselves don't have arms and legs, right? We have to partner with the CSM organization, the support organization, to actually co-develop with them the offerings and activities that they do.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the episode. We really appreciate it. Again, really interesting to learn what you guys are doing over there. And we'd love to have you back maybe at the end of the year, sometime beyond. It would be great to see how you guys have evolved.
Happy to. Yeah, this is great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.